This is your video on the free will theodicy. Okay, so this is the first theodicy we're looking at, and a theodicy is an attempt to explain how it is that evil is compatible with the existence of God. Theodicies are given as a response to the problem of evil, where they're trying to say, well, like, look, the big three God, the omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient God, can exist, and we can have evil in the world at the same time. Typically, these theodicies are talking about moral evils mostly and not natural evils, and we'll see how that might become an issue a little later, but that's typically what they're talking about, but not always, right? So let's talk about the free will theodicy. Okay, so remember, this is a response to the problem of evil. So these are people trying to defend the existence of God in light of evil in the world, right? So, the free will theodicy might be really familiar to you all, but this one I think is a bit more precise. Okay, so the free will theodicy is that God gave us free will because of the great good it provides. And so the idea is, look, it's better that we have free will than not have free will. A lot of people like that idea, right? Many people think that if we were forced to live a certain kind of way, we had no free will at all, that our lives would be worse off, all right? So the idea that free will is a good thing is a pretty attractive idea. But if free will is a thing that is good and that we want and that God gives us, free will is actually logically incompatible with there being no evil in the world at all. Okay. In other words, it's actually logically impossible. So the argument goes, it's logically impossible to prevent evil while also giving us free will. Okay. You either get one or the other. Either you can prevent all the evil in the world from happening, but we have no free will, or you can give us free will, but there's going to be evil that occurs. Okay. So what's it mean for them to be logically impossible? Well, logical impossibility is a really strong kind of impossibility. It's saying it is literally impossible for something to occur, right? Some people talk about physical impossibility. So something that's physically impossible, right, is just something that can't occur because of natural laws, all right? So it's physically impossible for a human to travel at the speed of light without dying, I believe. Right, so the idea is that that's just because of the way that the world works, all right? But the world could have been different, right? It could have been the case that maybe light speed was different than how it actually is. It's possible, right? It didn't have to be the case that the physical world around us is the way it is, right? It wasn't necessarily set in stone. There were some random things that occurred, and it could have been different, all right? So something physically impossible, even though it can't occur physically, it's not a strong kind of impossibility where, like, we can talk about a universe where maybe the physical laws are different. We're not speaking like gibberish when we talk about gravity accelerating slightly quicker than it actually does, right? We're not talking crazy if we can say, like, oh, well, it's actually possible that maybe things could have been different with light speed travel, okay? It's possible, all right? It's not impossible. Logical impossibility, though, there's literally no way it could occur, right? So something that's logically impossible, typically it's like mathematical sorts of things. So 1 + 1 = 2. It's literally impossible for it to equal anything else, okay? It has to equal 2. There is not a single case where you can put 1 and 1 together and not get 2, okay? You can't get something else from it either. Or think about if I was to say that, hey, I can show you a round square, right? Round squares don't exist. It's logically impossible for a square to be round because a square has to have 4 90-degree angles, but if you have 4 90-degree angles, it can't be round. So it's logically impossible. There's no possible way you can have something that's a square also be round. That just does not work. The same idea is going on in this argument. The idea is that if we have free will, it's also logically impossible for an evil. Why? Because if we have free will, the thought goes, if humans have free will, humans sometimes choose to do good things, and sometimes we choose to do bad things, right? We choose good, sometimes we choose evil, right? That just falls out of having free will. We have the option to act in evil ways, and we have an option to act in good ways, okay? So if we have the option to act in evil ways, then it's possible that evil exists, okay? And then sometimes we're gonna act on it, all right? And as a result, some people do, because that's how humans are, all right? So, because if you want to prevent evil, the only way for that to occur would be to make it impossible for us to act in an evil way, right? But free will necessarily means that it's possible for us to act in an evil way. It's logically impossible, right? They contradict each other. It cannot both be the case that we have free will, which entails, again, that we can either act in a good way or a bad way, while at the same time saying, okay, but we're going to prevent evil by making sure you can't ever act in a bad way. But now you're just taking away free will now, right? Because free will requires those two things. Okay. So that's the argument. That's really it, all right? And, well, the further point also is that free will is a good thing that it's better to have than not. So if you think free will is a good thing, it's better to have than not, then, and you think that, I think we have Swinburne gives this free will defense in the textbook. And if you think that free will is logically incompatible with there being no evil at all, then this should be a good defense for the existence of God in the light of the problem of evil. Okay. Now, there have been some objections to this. Okay. So the first objection to the free will theodicy is that couldn't God have us freely choose to do good all the time? Here's a thought here. So it might not be the case that free will necessarily entails that it's possible for us to act evilly. Or if it does, maybe it's just the case that we're the sorts of beings that always act in a good way. So think of it like this. Suppose God gave us free will. So we could theoretically, if we wanted to, act in an evil way. So it's possible, but we're the sorts of creatures, right, that are just like steadfastly good. We're always going to choose the good thing. It's not that we can't do the evil thing, because we could if we wanted to, but we never want to, right? We always want to do the good thing. That's the idea. The objection is saying, well, wait a second though. That seems compatible with free will, because technically it's possible, right? We could act evilly, but God could have made us to be creatures such that we're always going to choose to do the good thing, because we're going to have a genuine choice. I mean, we're going to have a choice to either do good or do evil. We could do evil if we wanted to, but we're never going to want to. We're always going to want to do good, and we're always going to do good. Okay, just based on the sorts of beings we would be, and we're not precluding evil as a possibility. It's just that the possibility we never take is the idea, right? So it's kind of like a sneaky sort of way of giving us free will, but also always having us act in a morally good fashion. Okay. It's also important to note here, by the way, we're really talking about moral evils here, right? So free will is, so going back to Swinburne for a second, and this is addressing talking as well, but the argument is saying that free will is going to necessitate that moral evils exist, right? Because the moral evils, again, the things that people are doing, right? So we're not talking about natural evils actually for the free will defense right now. We're only talking about moral evils, right? Okay, anyway, so back to the objection. Okay, so one way people have tried to respond to this objection, okay, so remember, this is people arguing against the free will theodicy, which is arguing against the problem of evil, which is arguing against the existence of God. Okay, so this is in defense of God, the free will theodicy. This is back against God. Okay. People have replied to this argument by saying, well, wait a second, okay, but if God made us creatures who always freely choose to do good all the time, then it just sounds like God's kind of in a way just forcing us to choose good all the time, right? It seems like it's not actually a genuine choice, right? If we're just always gonna act in a good way, then you might think, well, that's kind of just really forcing us, right? Maybe the possibility is technically there, but no, that's not really what's going on. What's going on is we're just being forced to act a certain kind of way because we're of a certain kind of character. Okay. So they're really just going to say, like, yeah, this might sound like it's free, but really it's not. We're just being forced still. It's just forced with extra steps, basically. Okay. So you might like that reply. You might think there's a problem with it. All right. So the second objection is a kind of variation of the first one. It's like a little bit of a watered down version of it. And this objection is going to say, okay, never mind if God could always have us freely choose to act all the time. What if we just chose to act good most of the time? This might seem kind of weak, like, okay, why are we talking about this? What's going on here? Here's the idea. The idea is, okay, look, okay, maybe you buy this, you're like, okay, maybe the theists are right, and it turns out that maybe they're, like, if, in this case, God's just forcing us to act in a morally good way, that's not compatible with free will, okay? You might say, okay, fine, whatever. But God maybe could have made us so that maybe we don't choose to act in a morally good way all the time, but we do most of the time, right? So in other words, we're trying to mitigate evil here. We're trying to like reduce the amount of evil, right? So we're reducing the amount of times people choose to act in a morally evil way, but sometimes once in a while they act evilly. Okay, just not as much as they do currently, all right? What's the benefit of that? Why does that matter? Because if God can do that while also preserving free will, then we're gonna have cases where God can prevent evil without us losing any sort of greater good, right? Because remember, the only greater good in this defense is free will. So if we can keep free will, but also reduce the amount of evil, then God should be able to do it, right? It seems like as of now, though, he isn't, right? It seems like God could have made us so that, like, yeah, we still have free will, but he just dials down the evil in humans, so to speak, just like a little bit, all right? Or maybe a lot, okay? Maybe you could do a lot while preserving free will, all right? But if that's possible, then there's cases where you can prevent evil where there's no greater good lost. And then going back to Rowe's argument, now we have an argument against the existence of God, because now we have unnecessary evil in the world, okay? It's unnecessary because we still have free will in this case, all right? We just act evil less. All right, so that's that other objection. Now, there's a similar sort of reply that theists give, which is that, okay, just in the same way that this is just sort of forcing you to act in a good way all the time and to compel free will, same idea here. Whether you turn the dial down to 0, so to speak, with evil, or you turn it down to 50%, you're still forcing people in a way that theists are going to say. So the reply is really similar. It's just that, well, okay, now you're just forcing to a lesser extent. Okay, that's still incompatible with free will. All right, you might not like that you might not like that reply either. Maybe you do like it. I'll leave it up to you to figure out. Okay, now those are the two objections that I brought up in your book. One other objection, which I'm not gonna write down. I'm just gonna tell you, which I kind of alluded to when I talked about the distinction between moral evil and natural evil, is that this only talks about moral evil, right? The free will defense does not give us any good reason to think that natural evils need to exist, okay? Natural evils are still kind of evil though, right? And especially in Rowe's argument, where he talks about the fawn dying in the forest, that's a natural evil where a lot of unnecessary suffering seems to be occurring, okay? And if that is the case, and there's still unnecessary suffering that doesn't need to occur, then we still have the problem of evil on our hands, right? So the free will defense is a good job, maybe, at best I should say. The free will defense is a good job at explaining moral evils, at best. Okay, you might think there's problems with it, but at best it does that. What it doesn't do is does not explain natural evils, right? And that's actually a really big issue, because if you can't explain the natural evils, you still have a problem on your hands, and that's the problem of evil. Okay, so that's the free will theodicy. The next theodicy we'll look at is the soul-making theodicy.